what everyone is experiencing now as a way of working remotely, in my opinion, does not represent what remote work would normally look like in a different global situation.
Hey, you're listening to the School of Innovation. I'm your host, Yaniv Korem, and my guest today is Laïla von Alvensleben. Laïla is the head of culture and collaboration at Mural, a digital workspace for visual collaboration. She manages a distributed team of over 140 people across multiple continents and time zones. She is a champion for the remote-first approach to collaboration, empowering Mural's rapidly growing team to successfully work from anywhere. Laïla's background is in UX design, having worked on digital product design at Hano and educational workshops at Hyper Island. She helped create the Remote Starter Kit and is one of the first members of the Remote Work Association, a network that organizes online events to promote location-independent jobs. This is part one of my conversation with Laïla. Enjoy and stay safe. All right, Laïla, welcome to the show.
Hi, Anis. Thank you for having
me. Glad to have you with us today. I am genuinely excited. I know that you've been super busy on social, web social, these last couple of days, right? With everything that's going on.
Right? Definitely. It's been a bit of a crazy time.
Yeah, so I definitely appreciate the time and the opportunity to ask you all these questions. First of all, how are you these days, and where are you?
Wow, that's a big question.
Yes, I know.
That's every time I ask that question to somebody these days, there's a bit of a silence at first, and then people are looking out into space, and then they look back at you if it's on a webcam, and then they say, "I'm doing okay." That's exactly what I've done right now. Just looked out the window and looked back at my screen. I think I'm okay. I also try to remember that I am in a privileged position to still be working right now and be healthy. So I'm grateful for that, and it's hard, of course, but it could be worse.
Because you don't realize it, but things can get really bad very quickly, and we're not there. We're on this call, and you didn't say where you were.
Sorry. Yes, I am. Forgot where I was. I'm in my bedroom in Switzerland. So I am from Switzerland, from the southern part, the Italian-speaking part. For those who don't know, there is an Italian-speaking part, and we're a minority, so I'm right here.
Okay, perfect. A minority Italian-speaking part in the south of Switzerland.
Exactly. No, because most people think, we only speak German, or some people think German and French, but actually we have 4 languages. Italian is one of them. And then we have Rätoromansch. It's a very special language spoken only in Switzerland, as far as I know.
Huh. And you speak that language? Does everyone speak that language?
I don't speak it. No, it's no. It's like I don't even know if it's like a 0.4% of people or something like that. But it's a Latin language. It's most related to Romanian, and it's a real language. It's not a dialect. It's an official language. And so, but the people who live in that region, they still have to go to school either on the Italian side or the Swiss side of Switzerland, the German side of Switzerland.
Oh.
But their language, I can kind of understand it sometimes. Sometimes it reminds me a little bit of Catalan in a way, because there's some words that are very Latin. Yeah. So there we have a little geography lesson in your podcast.
Yes, I don't think my listeners expected that, but you learn something new every day. And that's the interesting bit, I think. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, sure.
So it seems like everyone I speak to these days is obviously shocked by the ramifications of COVID-19. But for us innovators, it's actually I don't know. I want to use the word frustrating, right? Because it seems like I was talking to a potential client in the education space, right? And she told me that this last week of COVID-19 here in Israel, they've actually went full digital, right? Within a week. Now, it's something, she said, that they've been trying to do for the last 10 years. 10 years. And they managed to do it in a week. That's insane, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sorry for laughing, but it's there's a lot of people now who have been begging to do home office days, and now they can, even though they've been told that it wasn't possible for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that cuts across, like, that sort of behavior cuts across a lot of disciplines. And for us innovators who have been like trying to get people to change for the longest time, or all of a sudden, just standing there saying, what the fuck? Like, I mean, you've had all this time. We were here to help you. And now COVID-19 comes in and all of a sudden you're all, boom, doing it. And I wanna tie that into what you do, which is remote work. Because it seems like, and I was looking at your website, you've been doing into that since 2014, right?
Yes, that's when I first started working remotely.
Okay, so in 2014, how many people, how many companies do you think, what percentage of the population do you think was working remote?
Much, much smaller percentage than today, that's for sure.
Yes, yeah.
I think I remember seeing there was an article or some kind of report from Virgin at the time that I was using because I wrote a thesis on the topic. And they were predicting that by 2020, 50% of the workforce in the US would be working remotely. So I think back then, it was even just like not even, I don't even say 10%. I mean, working remotely in a way, though, what I want to say is there's been companies working remotely, even if they are in the same building and they're on different floors and they're sending each other information, or in that sense, then it's a much bigger percentage. Or if we think of multinational companies who have been, sharing emails and things like that, it's just that we have started thinking of distributed teams in a almost like a philosophy or a foundational part of a company. So some companies that have been set up are remote from the start, and then they build everything around that, their culture and their processes. Whereas other companies were, expanding in the world and working remotely, but they would never use that word. So it's also difficult to actually say what percentage.
That's interesting. So it's not just about, so when you think about remote, initially you think geography, right? People are in separate places around the world, but you're saying, no, it's not. Your definition is it's more about the philosophy, the culture, kind of like the principles of how you work, how you organize your work.
Yeah. And I think, with technology, even with phones, if you had people somewhere else and you're calling them, asking them to collaborate on something, then you are essentially working remotely. And I don't want to be, I don't want to be nitpicking the word, but if you look at it that way, then yes. And so I find it interesting how then some companies say, oh no, you can't work from home today. But in the meantime, they're like a huge company, already spread out in different places or in a big building across different floors.
Yeah.
And if you're picking up the phone or sending an email, then you're working remotely.
Interesting. I did not think about that. Yeah. So now that we're all working remotely,
correct.
Well, we weren't given any any opportunity, any different options. What's important to keep in mind? Like, how do you? You've been in this space for the longest time. I'm sure you, or maybe you have been expecting this sort of scenario. what are some of the kind of guidelines, principles that you would give someone who just went through this transition now, was not working remotely, or their work wasn't organized remotely, and now it's like full on remote?
Right. Well, I will start out by saying, I mean, I could have never imagined this specific scenario that we are in. I was predicting that as a way of working, it would become more popular, and it was already trending, and it would continue to do so. But I thought it would just gradually grow and become more common. But now it's a forced thing, and I think the first thing I will point out for anyone listening is what everyone is experiencing now as a way of working remotely, in my opinion, does not represent what remote work would normally look like in a different global situation. And by that, I mean that now, you're working without the opportunity of going out and socializing. Your entire family is at home. If you're a parent or anyone else living with family, you have the kids at home. You're also doing homeschooling at the same time. You have a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of anxiety, perhaps. Yeah. And so it adds on to that feeling of having to adapt and learn something new. And so it is intense. And it would be sad if what people would take away from this is, oh man, like remote work is really, really intense, because there's a whole other ecosystem around you that is adding onto that intensity. So in other circumstances, remote work would not have to be so painful, perhaps, and people's moods would be better, and the global situation would be more positive. So with that said, I think that what people need to consider is that it takes time. There's a lot of trial and error. Try not to be too hard on yourselves as workers or even as employers, or get too frustrated. I mean, we have to be kind to ourselves, I think, always, and especially now, even more so. And that's the first piece of advice is really try to figure things out together, talk openly and transparently about how things are going, and have this conversation, not just say, okay, I'm going to assign one or two people in the company to figure out what tools we're going to use and how we're going to do it. I think it has to be a team-wide conversation in some way. Obviously, for bigger companies, you might want to break up that conversation, but there's nothing stopping a CEO or a team leader. I mean, this is their moment to step and open up the conversation to everyone, and maybe getting everyone on a Zoom call, and doing like an Ask Me Anything, or like having a town hall meeting and saying, okay, what are on people's minds? What do people think about this way of working? What have they heard from other people? Like, let's share our resources. Let's share our knowledge. Maybe we have contacts in our networks of people who can help us, or best practices or things like that. Let's gather all that information and see what we can do. And then we can assign people to, focus on that. But let's also have once like a conversation as a company to see what we want to do. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't want to stop you. I think that's fantastic advice. I think you're absolutely correct, in saying this is like, I want people to listeners to take away from this, that this is not the regular situation. This is not like the way that remote work should be. It's an extreme situation. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's not about copy pasting what you used to do before COVID-19 and what you're doing now. And I feel like a lot of people are doing that. Do you get that same sort of feeling that they're trying to kind of copy paste?
A little bit. I don't know how companies are doing it internally, to be honest. I've just spoken to a few who weren't sharing what they were doing too much, but they were asking a lot of questions. But I do sense that there's a lot of
what questions they were asking?
Well, we need help with consulting or training on how to work remotely, how to collaborate, what tools should we use and these kind of things. And what are some best practices? What are some tips and tricks that you can share with us? So those are the kind of questions that I get asked. They're quite high level, to be honest. They're not too specific.
Right.
Few people have asked me about help with their culture. It's more about the collaboration side of things. And that's interesting because I think culture plays such a huge part, and they shouldn't dismiss that or have it as an afterthought. I also have the impression that there's a huge number of people who all of a sudden are popping up and as remote work experts or consultants who can help others. And some of these people, I question how much experience they have. And some truly do have the experience. I wonder if there's a lot of people maybe taking this as an opportunity to maybe pivot to something that might be more helpful, seeing the demand right now. Yeah. And that's fine. Maybe I would have done the same in their situation. I'm not saying that I wouldn't, but it's also creating a lot of noise. And somehow, I kind of hesitated in the beginning, like how much should I put out there and add on to that noise, or should I just wait for people to approach me? Because I have enough work. I'm not necessarily in need of more clients. Although obviously I want to help people, but I also want to make sure that if I put something out there, it's something really valuable and not just repetition of here's, the top 10 tips to work remotely. Yeah. Because you can already Google that and find that,
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So what I've been following David C. Baker. I don't know if you know him. David C. Baker.
I'm not.
No, he wrote The Business of Expertise. So he's the experts, and he talks about that, about creating noise in the marketplace. And really, as an expert, and you're an expert on remote work, you want to be providing the insight, right? You want to be providing the insight. So you're the one that's able to connect all the dots, and then therefore you're able to provide actionable, applicable insight to people, as opposed to, like you said, the same listicle, right? 10 ways to blah, 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 or a list of like endless number of apps to improve the way you work remotely, and all that stuff that I think at the end of the day just confuses people instead of really adding value to their lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I for a long time, if people would say, "Oh, you are the remote work expert," I don't. Sometimes I don't feel comfortable with that word because I'm still learning all the time. I did work with a fully remote team before called Hano, and we were about 8 people. We were 8 people, when I was there, and whatever worked well with Hano, and I tried to apply to other companies. I soon realized that our way of doing things it wasn't a one size fits all. And so now that I'm at Mural, and today at Mural we're 140 employees, but when I started we were around 60 something. I'm also learning, okay, well, Mural has a different culture, has a different way of working. The things that I applied at Hano might not necessarily work here. And then again, I have to constantly check myself on things. So yeah, I can provide insight, but I also can provide a lot of, I think like you real cases, anecdotes and things like that of what other teams have tried. And I think that can be valuable as well, and not just say, put a webcam on. Well, why? And give me an example of a meeting when people did not put a webcam on and how that went. So that's also important. Yeah.
So since you brought up Hano, I want to dive into that, and we'll get to Mural in a bit. But I want to talk a little bit about Hano, and this was in 2014. Hano.
Yes, I joined them in 2014. That's right.
Yeah, because that was the first time that I was introduced to the concept of remote work and your work specifically. So I remember you at Hano, and doing the webinars, talking about remote work and all that stuff. I remember being, and still to this day, super impressed by the amount of thought the amount of investment that went into thinking about remote work and really structuring it as a methodology, and then later putting it out like openly and freely as a playbook for everyone to learn from what you guys were doing. So can you talk a little bit about Hano? What was it like to work there? You know, how much remote work were you doing? Was it really 100%? Like,
oh yeah, it was 100. it was 200%. No, we were all remote, and it was interesting when I joined them, actually, because I just wanted to interview somebody from the company or kind of shadow them and see how do you guys collaborate remotely. So you have to remember that at the time there weren't so many companies doing it, and there wasn't a huge amount of content out there. And specifically, I was looking at how can you do design thinking, because my background is in design. How can you do design thinking remotely? And there was nothing out there.
This was part of your master's, I think.
Yeah. So for my master's thesis, I was looking to write on that topic. You could Google design thinking, you could Google remote work, and you'd find different things, but there was nothing connecting the two. Yeah. So I set out to talk to some people and see how they worked. And I think through a tweet, actually, somebody read a response that I wrote to somebody else. And that person who then replied to that thread worked at Hano. So I still have to thank him today, Arnes, if he ever listens to this. He replied. And then I was like, who's this guy? Where is he working? And then I saw that he worked at Hano, and I went and then dug deeper and saw this UX design team that was fully remote. I think there were maybe 6 people at the time. And the founder was between the UK and Malaysia. The others were in Germany, Spain, Hungary. No, sorry, not Germany, but definitely Hungary, Spain, the UK, Bali. And wow. And yeah, it was really fascinating. So at the time I was studying in Manchester, in the UK. So the closest person to speak to was the guy was Matt, who was based in London. So I said, okay, I'll come to London and I'll talk to Matt. And Matt was very funny, and as he always is, and we've become friends over the years. But he said, don't just like look at me and get involved. come to the co-working space, help me out, do the work with me.
Smart
Don't
man.
just look at what I'm doing. Yeah. So I was like, all right, so what do you want me to do? So I kind of became this intern who wasn't just shadowing, but it was learning by doing, which was actually really the philosophy of also where I was studying at Hyper Island in Manchester. So it was a great way to learn and to observe and do. And then I was supposed to get involved for a week. And then he said, hey, do you have something to do the next week? And I said, no, not really. I'm a student. Do you want to get more involved? I said, sure, I'd like to get paid as well. So it just kind of continued. And then it was after a month, it was like, why don't you keep going? And I continued. Anyway, so I stayed with Hano, I think, for 3 years. Also, it was funny because as an intern, they had planned a company retreat in Argentina. So this was just after I joined. I would see conversations in Slack between them. And I was thinking, that's cool. They're going to Argentina, but I'm an intern. Like, how can I, they're not inviting me, obviously, because I just joined. But what if I pay my own trip and I go there and then I can meet them in person and interview them in person for my thesis? That would be great. So I asked, I dared to ask, can I just come? And they're like, yeah, there's room in the Airbnb. You can have, there's a bed. You don't have to pay for the Airbnb, but you can pay your own travel expenses. So I did that, went to Argentina, met them in person, which was fabulous. For any remote team, it's still, there's something special that happens when you meet in person. You really get to know the people.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting was that at the same time, just before I went there, somebody in my alumni network sent an email to all the students saying, hey, I work at Mural. Is anybody looking to test this out for doing design thinking remotely? And I was like, oh yeah, like that's what I'm trying to do as well. So I got in touch. And then when I went to Argentina, I told the girl, I'm like, hey, I have to go now on a company retreat. She's like, oh, we're based in Argentina. So
wow.
I said, oh, really? Well, we're going to be in this neighborhood. And she said, well, that's where our office is. So
that's
I actually
incredible.
met the people at Mural when I was starting at Hano as well.
Okay.
And it was a really small team in Buenos Aires. And I never, ever suspected in my wildest dreams that I would end up working at Mural years later.
That is so funny. Wow.
Yes.
What a coincidence.
Super coincidence. You know, it's really fun. And they gave us a demo in person. They're like, this is how you use Mural. This is how you do design thinking.
Yeah.
How you can do it remotely. So we played around with it. I wrote my thesis. I stayed with Hano. And to answer your initial question, yeah, we did put a lot of thought and consideration into remote work that especially came from the founder, who was a big blogger and would read a lot. And we would all share books. John Lay, he would share a lot of his books. Matt was reading a lot. And so we were reading books like Reinventing Organizations and others about just different ways of working, not just about remote work, but just what are some progressive ways that companies can come together. So we had, a flat team, no hierarchy. We were fully remote. We eventually tried different things with our salaries. First, we had like a salary calculator. That's when I joined. And then later we could try to choose our own salaries and justify that to the rest of the team. And
I was reading every blog post.
Yeah, those were days where we used to write a lot. And then I was writing about our design thinking experiments, how we were doing them remotely. And then I was trying to apply some kind of team building methodologies that I learned at Hyper Island around giving feedback and things. And I was thinking, okay, how can I do this team building remotely? So I was focusing more on the culture side of things and doing little initiatives within Hano to test things out. So we did that for a few years. And the playbook was essentially, kind of the whole manual of this is how we work at Hano. So it was used both internally for us to know, to have a document which express how we worked and what we agreed on, but it was also super useful to share with clients because then they could see that we had our shit together. And it's like, okay, you maybe don't trust us because you'll never meet us in person. Well, this is how we work. We're like super organized. Read through this. This has everything from our holidays to our salaries to how we will do a design sprint with you, how we'll structure the days, how we'll communicate with you. These are the tools we'll use. These are our workflows and our processes, and you will be able to be part of it. So clients loved it because they didn't even get that from, companies that were in their same city. So we were being super transparent, and then we would do a design sprint with them and they would see how we work. And then they would be super inspired and try to apply some of our culture in their own companies. And ask us for advice. And over the years, we then became friends with some of these clients, which I'm still in contact with. And then we also had it, and it's still open to the public online. And the whole idea, John was saying, sure, somebody could take this whole thing, copy it and run with it. But it's never going to be like Hano anyway. So we weren't worried to have competition in that sense because there weren't a lot of teams back then who were doing, or agencies that were offering to do design sprints remotely. So we just knew that they would face their own struggles and they'd have to figure it out, like what works best for them, because this worked best for Hano. And we were 6 or 7 when we first started. When I first started, they were already there since a while. But I think I still stand by that idea. Like you can share an idea online, but it's not necessarily going to be like yours if somebody else does it.
Absolutely. And for the listeners, if you still to this day Google Hano, HANO, remote work playbook, you will get that. I think it would be the first hit on Google. And it's still, I think it is and was ahead of its time. I think so much thought went into this document, and really the experimental aspect of it, it comes across like we were trying, or you were trying out different things. And here we're reporting on what we tried, what worked, what didn't. I think that was like super refreshing, to read at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was, we definitely had people who inspired us as well. The blog at Buffer had great content. They still do. They have an amazing blog. And there were other companies doing things like Automatic those who created WordPress, and
right.
and then I think Zapier started writing things, and so there were quite a handful of people sharing there, but they weren't companies that everybody knew. You know, these were mainly tech-based companies and smaller teams, and who just did things in a completely different way, and were more, I would say, more purpose-driven. If I think of companies like Hano or Buffer, and that's what I found hugely inspiring, was how purpose-driven they were and still are.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And also, like, for me, being a productivity freak, it was just kind of seeing how you went through like design thinking through iteration over iteration, perfecting, right, your craft, almost to the point of obsession, right? It sort of, I don't want to sound cliche or anything like that, but it was really a work of art, right? It was really something that you understood, that was honed over a long period of time, and a lot of thought went to it. So if for the listeners, if you are interested in remote work, and if you're listening to this, then you obviously are, I would say Google Hano and check that playbook out.